Energy Transition, episode number 68. Our topic today is grid security with Irina Slav, Temi Nemeth, David Blackman. Good morning, good evening to all.
Hello.
Morning.
Hello.
Please let me share. This is from the U.S. Department of Energy report, December to 2022.
Yeah.
Using the US as an example, of course, the problem certainly exists in different countries. But the point, I made a short, let me see here. Yeah. The major challenges of this report, energy in the US, energy infrastructure are 25 plus years old. Expansion must require 3 times by 2050. Extreme weather events is a point, a very important point. Insufficient manufacturing capacity. Oh, my God. Potential for physical attacks and problem with suppliers, reliability of suppliers. So please, David, let me ask you first, starting with you. Is the situation critical, as the report says, and the problem is EVs, electrical ovens, or are other reasons?
Electric ovens, yeah. Yeah, they're replacing all the gas stoves with electric, and no, that's not really it. So yeah, that report is just fascinating to me from DOE, because they DOE, as just a matter of doing its business, is not acting like there's any kind of emergency at all, and there really is. And Congress is also focused on the wrong things. We had a field hearing of a subcommittee of the House Energy and Commerce Department on Friday in North Carolina. And the main focus, I mean, it was focused on grid security, but almost all they talked about was recent attacks, physical attacks on some of the substations. One big one happened in North Carolina, and that's why they were out there. And there's been a rash of those across the country. There's over 50,000 substations across the country with the big transformer facilities and switching stations and all that. And that's just a part of the grid. And you can't harden and protect those all. So, I mean, it's a legitimate concern, and something does need to be done to improve security around those. But the real emergency, and I think it's an emergency, and so do people in the industry that I've talked to recently, is this shortage of transformers that document mentioned, and the hearing did mention in passing, for about 5 minutes out of a hearing that went on for hours. We have a severe shortage, particularly of the high capacity transformers that are such a key part of the transmission grid in our country. And the supply chains are all mucked up. I mean, you can't get them. You can't replenish supplies in any reasonable amount of time. So we have a very low inventory on hand as we go into hurricane season. And in 2017, we saw in Hurricane Harvey that a storm that comes on shore and meanders around for a week can shut down a major part of the grid in Texas and in Louisiana and parts of Arkansas and Oklahoma. And if that should happen again this year, we probably don't have the needed supplies to restore all that power to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of customers who are without power in any reasonable amount of time. I'm told that it is often taking not just weeks or months, but years to acquire high capacity transformers in certain parts of the United States. And the lower capacity transformers, the supply chains are also messed up. And as you mentioned, we don't make enough of them here. We do manufacture some in the United States, but only a fraction of what is needed. So most of it has to be imported from overseas. And of course, our power grid has to compete with the grids in every other country on earth for those imported supplies. And so at the same time, all of this is happening, and demand is projected to increase by the percentages you talked about. The U.S. Department of Energy that released that document saying there's an emergency is planning to implement, they're about to implement new efficiency standards that will force a retooling of the entire domestic industry to manufacture these transformers that already currently operate at between 97 and 99% efficiency. So you're talking about raise a new regulation that's going to force a major sea change in the whole industry that will take years, cause more and more delays for a rounding error of increase in efficiency in that equipment. And so it's just the biggest, I want to use a profanity, but we all are familiar with, but I mean, it's just an amazing series of stupid events that have caused this, and no one in power in the Biden administration seems focused on really doing the right thing here, and that's potential disaster in the making for a lot of people in our country.
Before we go to Tammy, please let me show some remarks.
Hey, Stu.
Trolling us.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes, everyone else looks great, and I'm here too.
Yeah, especially David. Okay, Tammy, and Canada and the UK have this similar situation of the US.
I think it's all over, because when you have this expansion of renewables, it's not necessarily efficient in how they're transmitted, because you need all of these new lines, you need all of these new substations with lots of different means to convert the energy and try to smooth things out. And as David pointed out, you might have domestic manufacturing, but where are all those component parts coming from? So it's, if you're importing component parts from elsewhere where there's supply chain issues, and like with the renewables, you're competing with all these other countries to build the same stuff, it's going to increase costs, whether it's copper or whatever. And I think one of the things we've lost sight of is, what is the purpose of a grid? What's the purpose of having reliable electricity? Because if you look back in history for the whole electrification movement at the beginning, there was a sense that it would help instill progress and make things better. And I feel like we're going backwards, and it's not about making things better, more efficient, or being able to make life easier for people, or to have a competitive advantage in industrialization and so on. It's the reverse. And so I think countries need to get back to understand, what is the purpose of a grid and how can you enhance stability? Because ultimately it's reliability, stability, security. And in Canada, for example, a lot of the electricity generation is done and owned by the provinces. So it's state-owned to some extent and not about making profits. Whereas in other countries, it seems they're worried about making profits for these things. So again, it comes back to, what's the point of your grid? Is it to make profits for companies, or to ensure the strength of your nation?
Yeah, Irina, and is there a shortage of skilled people, labor in this sector? You mean?
Yes, there's a massive shortage of workers for the electricity industry. This report by DOE that you showed at the beginning spoke about the need to expand the transmission line network by 60% by 2030. This is impossible because there are not enough linemen, the people who work on transmission lines. And there is no way. No, I'm saying this is literally impossible, because I have been reading, statements from the industry, from power utility companies, that it takes 7 years to train a lineman. So, even if new people are coming into these sorts of careers, it will take years to train them. And then you have in the US especially. I'm not sure about other places, but I spoke to Meredith Angwin a couple of weeks ago, and she told me there's opposition from people about new transmission lines. And I
Yeah.
asked her why. What's the problem with transmission lines? Well, they cut down trees, and people just don't want transmission lines passing by their properties.
But
So you have local opposition to new transmission lines because they don't always pass through deserted regions of even a country as huge as the US. And you don't have the people to do this, just like you don't have the people to install all the wind turbines and all the solar farms that the transition would require. I mean, Germany alone has a shortage of about 5 million people in solar alone.
wow.
In the context of its solar power ambitions, compared to all the
God.
gigawatts in solar power Germany wants to install, it would need 5 million people more than it has. Even though employment in the solar industry, especially for panel installers, is not a full-time job. It's not a full-time long-term job. You can work on one project this week and another next week, etc. And still there are not enough people. So really I have no idea what these governments are
What-
actually planning and
Which
how
solution they have?
realistic this is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's no solution, not an immediate solution. It will
Immediate
take
solution.
years to train all these people.
Yeah, that's right. Interesting. Stuart, what about China test attack last week?
I don't know anything about that.
I don't know about it. All I would say, I guess maybe he's talking about an EMP kind of thing. China knows if they do that, we're just going to do it back to them. So I'm not sure they really want to experience that themselves. We have far more capability in that arena in the United States than China currently has, and so I didn't know they had done that test, but I don't think we need to worry about that too much. Not in my front yard. Yeah. Well, and so this is a great point that Arena raised, the rights of way for transmission lines. I'm in a part of Tarrant County where the main big wind energy transmission line from West Texas comes right through within 300 or 400 yards of my home. The right of way for that transmission line is at least 75 yards wide. And, once the transmission lines are built, you have these 100-foot high poles or standards, big, huge things with all these electricity wires running down them. And it's an eyesore into perpetuity. And, of course, people are complaining about those.
Sure.
And just as they complain about oil and gas pipelines coming through their area. But the difference is when those pipelines are built, once they're put in the ground and covered up, that right of way, which is typically less than half as wide as a right of way for a transmission line, is restored to its previous condition. Okay, there's no trees, but it's a green space at that point, and there's no eyesore into perpetuity from an oil or gas pipeline. So that's the difference with transmission lines, is they're all overhead and they're just this disruption of the view shed for whatever region they go through. And that's going to be an ongoing issue for the expansion of our power grid, not just in the United States, but all over the world, because people don't want to live with that in their front yard or backyard.
Oh, don't worry. There's not enough, steel and aluminium to build them. So
well, exactly. Not enough copper to make all the wires that are going to be needed either. And it's just like we're just proceeding down the tracks at 100 miles an hour to an inevitable train wreck of supply chains, and no one in a position of authority has the courage to stand up and say stop. And so here we go.
Tell me, for the consumers, do they have responsibility of this problem with grid stability and so?
Well, I mean, Irina had posted an article earlier today on Twitter about, oh no, it was Luca. Luca did about the the Swiss referendum on
Yeah.
net zero. And in that article, it talks about that it's time to change behaviors. And I know in the UK, because their grid is always in trouble and they've put more coal on to kind of keep things going and whatnot, they've said that one of the key components of their grid stability plan is changing consumer demand, which then means, of course, you have to use less. And one of the things that they're encouraging, because they just did an audit in the UK, was that the smart meters, because they had mandated that every house would have to have a smart meter by last year or something. And they've only got, I think, 40% or 50% people having taken the smart meter, and 10% of them don't work. And it was just a huge kerfuffle when they put them in, because it was just terrible. And so now they need a nudge campaign apparently in the UK to convince people to take the smart meter. But as we found out over the winter, people who had smart meters could volunteer to have their electricity throttled when it was high demand. And so if they reduced their electricity use, they'd get a discount or get paid $5 or something like that. You couldn't use your stove, TV, fridge, computer, whatever. They're like, $5. This is nothing. What do you? This isn't worth it. But they want that power, that capacity to be able to manage the grid from a central planning point of view, where there'll be somebody or an AI or whatever in the control room. Oh, well, we're getting a little bit too much demand. We better cut back, and we can manage it. And so it goes back to what Mark Carney talks about all the time. What gets measured gets managed. If everybody has a smart meter, then everything's measured, and therefore it can be managed appropriately. And that's the real concern, is that, you're going to have these central planners telling you, sorry, and maybe not even telling you, maybe just cutting it off, right? So you're watching TV and all of a sudden, poof, it's off. Oh, sorry, too much demand in your region right now. Gotta cut it down.
Yeah. Temi, it's for
Yeah.
you this question. Sorry, Irina.
That's good.
Temi, any service provider, please.
Well, okay, so one of the interesting things in Canada is that you get a province like Quebec that has nation building desires. And so it's a state-run electricity generation, and they run it like a business. But they subsidize local consumers and then export their energy supposedly at a higher rate in order to keep the prices low within the province. And then they lure industrial development that way. For example, Saskatchewan, it's run by a crown corporation. They're open to the public on what their books are and whatnot, and the different things that they're doing. And people expect, if it's state owned, to have reliable, affordable energy. And I'm pro capitalism, but I struggle with this, because on the one hand, I think sometimes if there's too much corporate activity, it can be a mess and make a really big mess of things. The way the UK does it, it's a hybrid between government control to some extent and private operation. It's a disaster. So I'm not sure what the solution is, because when governments do get involved, it can be really bad, but in other circumstances, it seems to work. So I don't know.
I remember
you,
when they
Grant, ma'am.
privatized the railways in Britain.
Yeah.
The service got much worse so fast. It was amazing. So I think some services are better off owned by the state. So
Yeah, I mean, when they privatized,
without
when they privatized the train, the government had let the infrastructure go down so bad that when it was privatized, the private companies were then left having to try and upgrade it, which then, of course, made it, how are they going to recoup their investment? And then it's still kind of quasi government controlled, and I don't know. It's a mess.
David do not have these problems of private or state companies.
Oh yeah, we do. In Texas, we went to a deregulated market in Texas electricity market, and I think it was 1999. The legislature passed the law to deregulate, and it was implemented a year later. I like to talk to people. I like to remind everyone when we start talking about the benefits of deregulation in Texas, that we never had to worry about any blackouts when I was growing up in a regulated electricity market where Central Power and Light was the provider of electricity in our region. And the plants were all thermal capacity. We didn't have any wind, any solar. We didn't have this incredibly complex bidding for, to put in power into the grid, and ERCOT having to try to manage it all. We didn't have blackouts. Didn't have to worry about whether or not we had enough generation capacity on the grid. Now, we've had a lot of growth, admittedly, and economic growth and population growth since the deregulation kicked in. But the reality is our problems in Texas have stemmed from the inability of ERCOT to really manage and integrate this increasing complexity and manage it properly. And, we can blame renewables for that if we want to. I blame complexity for that. And so, whether it's been beneficial to consumers or not in terms of lower electricity rates, that's the claim. I'm not sure I'm seeing that in my electricity bill every month, frankly, right now. But, so it's a very mixed bag, and I go back and forth on which system's better. But I do know I never had, even living through near the coast and going through hurricanes, we always had electricity when I was a kid. And nobody died in the dead of winter from going 4 days without electricity. And so, I think
David,
it's a very mixed bag.
David, regulated market is different from state company doing the service.
Yes,
So,
that's true. That's true. Yeah, we don't have state-owned. That's
yeah.
true.
Maybe the case of Bulgaria, Brazil, of course, we have.
Yes, we still have a regulated market for households, but there's talk that they're going to regulate the electricity market for households, which a part of me, a masochistic part of me wants to see, just to see the riots begin, because once they deregulate the electricity market, prices will soar sky high.
Yeah.
And people will take to the streets, because even now, we have something similar to the UK situation, where the price of electricity, the maximum price, gets reviewed once a year or something. And of course, every year they increase it because inflation, regardless of how the inflation rate is actually moving, regardless of anything else. I can't remember a year over the past 30 or so years when electricity prices have been down. Gas price goes up, goes down, but electricity prices go up. But by little, which is manageable for households. You have time to stomach it, to get adjusted. Once we remove that, once we deregulate the market, it will be, I'm sure it will be chaos. And it will be bad, but the EU wants us to do this. So I'll see how our brave leaders will play that fun out.
Interesting.
Fun is one way of, describing it.
Smart meters are for control. They will compare your carbon footprint to your electrical use. Yes.
No, that's a conspiracy theory, I'm sure.
Right. That's my conspiracy theory. Yeah.
But David, is it? David, is it possible to expand the U.S. grid? I mean, buy transformers, install lines. Is it possible? Is it feasible?
No. Not. Well, we expand it all the time, but talking about 60% by 2030 and tripling our capacity just 20 years after that, that means you double it and then you double it again after 2030, after you've already increased it 60%.
What will happen?
Well, what's going to happen is we're not going to have an energy transition. We're going to have, we'll have millions of electric vehicles on the roads, but they won't displace gas-powered automobiles to any great extent. We'll have a lot of wind and solar power, generating electricity on the grid, but they won't displace natural gas and nuclear. And we're going to have to build a lot more nuclear in the future, and just to keep up with expansion. And so we're going to have an energy diversification and an energy addition, but we're not going to have an energy transition just because of the physical limits and the people limits that we've discussed here today. You're just not, you can't, these are pipe dreams. These are fantasies. And at some point we're going to be forced to stop living in the fantasy world where energy policy is concerned. And I'm afraid that's probably going to be after we have a big catastrophe here in the United States and elsewhere.
The Energy Transition Podcast name will be transformed.
Well, you know what? Maybe we should change it to that because, you know,
happen.
Right. Yeah, it ain't going to happen. And, but it gives us a lot to talk about every Monday. So that's good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So I would like to share with you my vision to the next step of grid. Is this one? States play the grid.
Oh, that is awesome. I need a link to
That's
that.
cute.
I got to share that on Twitter.
Yeah, sure, I will send you. Okay, people, we are sad today because this. Tammy, please.
I wanted to just do a shout out to Meredith Angwin's book, Shorting the Grid. There was something she said in there that really resonated with me. And that's when she was talking about stakeholders and when companies, grids, whatever, consult with stakeholders. And what she said was she hated that word because what it really has come to mean is stakeholders means insiders. And so all these regulators and the grid people and whatnot, when they talk about we want to consult with stakeholders, they really mean the insiders. And you can apply that to lots of different things today. When they talk about stakeholder capitalism, it's really insider capitalism. When the different financial regulators want to consult with stakeholders, they have targeted stakeholders. So only those who they believe they wish to consult with. And so it's not like the small business owners, the citizens get consulted. And if they do, it's kind of like a pat on the head. Yes, you've had your say, but we're going to listen to somebody else, the insiders we want. And so I thought that was a really great insight that stakeholder really means insider.
And the rest of us are the ratepayers.
That's right.
We
And we
put
don't
the
count.
bill.
And
Yeah.
we don't count.
We just
Yeah.
pay for it all.
Conspiracy
No.
theories.
No, that's my job here.
Yeah, that's David's job.
Yeah.
That's not my job.
Yeah, that's real. But thank you so much. It was a great conversation today.
Thanks.
And we
This
need
was-
to
yeah.
pray to the grid be reestablished soon.
This was a great topic. Thank y'all for doing this.
Thank you.
Have a
good
great
day.
week.
Thank you. Have a good
Bye.
week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.